Well, I'm here with Emily Thornberry, who is Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary, and we're in the Museum of London, where we've just had a Shadow Cabinet meeting, and here there is an exhibition to commemorate it being 100 years since some women got the vote. So, Emily, it's a very special occasion, isn't it, really, today? What does it really mean for you, do you think?
I think the first thing to do is to applaud the Museum of London, who have been collecting suffragette memorabilia for years and years and years, before any other museums really started to realise how important this is. Obviously, it was only some women got the vote, and all men got the vote 100 years ago. But it was the beginning. I think that we'd had so long when the only power that women had been to ask nicely. And we just weren't being listened to. You know, there were all these conversations in sitting rooms, people would go on demonstrations, they would sign petitions, but it just wasn't getting on without the vote. When you have a vote, you may only have a little tiny bit of power, but you do have power. And if you use it collectively, you can really change things, because in the end, the power is with the people when you have a vote. But if you exclude all of women, then all you can do is press, hope to influence, be grateful. You know, it's not the way it should be.
And so there's a really strong message there about actually using the vote, because sometimes it's easy to think, will it make any difference? It's not going to make any difference in this town or whatever, but actually by going out, joining with others, of course you do make a difference.
I think it upsets me more than anything else talking to women who decide not to use the vote. And when I ask them why, quite often they say, because I don't really know anything about politics. And I say, well, you do. You know about what's important to you. You need to think about which political party is going to help you with what you think is important. And frankly, the guy next door knows as much about politics as you do, and he has no problems using his vote. Why are you not important? Why is your view not important? Why do you want to be overlooked? Because if you don't show up, you don't count.
Well, absolutely, and I think since you and I came into Parliament back in 2005, there's obviously been a significant increase in the number of women MPs, and do you think that really has made a difference to the agenda that we've got now in Parliament?
I think it's very slow. I think it's still too slow, but I think that the way we approach things is different, and I'm pleased to see that we don't seem to be apologising for ourselves in possibly the way that sometimes we seem to be pushed into doing before now. There have been some remarkable women in the past, but sometimes I felt that you felt like you were an exception, and if you were slightly different, you had to kind of slightly apologise for that. Women are not doing that now, and I'm really glad to see it.
That's very important, and as you say, there's a tendency for some men to say, well, it's only so-and-so, not to recognise actually that all women should have opportunities and all women have a voice.
Exactly.
So if we look back, for example, now it's nearly 50 years since Barbara Castle pushed through that legislation to give equal pay, and yet we're still seeing this massive pay gap. What more do you think we can do, and how can we help progress there?
Well, I think you have to start by recognising what a huge achievement it was bringing in the Equality Act, and it was in the teeth of opposition that Barbara and the women who supported her and the women of Dagenham pushed through that Equalities Act, and of its time it was really important. But it needs updating, and we need to think truly radically in the way that Barbara did. I think that there are certain organisations where there is a systematic undervaluing of women. And it seems to me that if a woman comes forward and complains about that organisation, that they should be able to go to a tribunal who says, OK, we're going to send in some investigators and we're going to see what's wrong, if anything is wrong with that company. I think that companies could also put themselves forward even before there's a complaint and say, have a look at us and have a look at us structurally and make sure that we're all right. Then I think there's an additional problem, which is I think that the vast majority of women are in 12 professions which are quite similar to the work that we do at home. So whether that's secretarial or caring or cooking or cleaning or all of these sort of support work, women do quite, very often childcare. And that is undervalued. It's simply undervalued. It always has been, and it continues to be. And until we get that right, until we start thinking, if I entrust my hugely loved 4-year-old child, and that is one of the most important jobs that anyone can do, and I want to be able to value that and pay that properly, or my mum, who's got dementia, and I want to value the work that they do, and it needs to be valued much more than it is at the moment, it seems to me.
I think you're absolutely right. There's still such a huge segregation, and as you say, are valuing in very different ways at different roles.
Yeah.
Can I ask you now a little bit about the fact that obviously you're our Shadow Foreign Secretary, and so therefore your experience of what happens overseas must also be very important to you, and what do you think we can do there perhaps to help women more?
I think there's whenever we get delegations of women MPs particularly from countries, I'm thinking particularly of some of the meetings that we've had in the Middle East, it's so interesting talking to them, and they get such a lot out of it. And they are amazed that there are as many women as there are, although we continue to have difficulties. And indeed, when I see women from the Nordic countries, where all the leadership are women,
Amazing.
We have things to learn too.
Absolutely.
So I think and there's also quite a development of what does it mean to have a feminist foreign policy, and how can we promote that, and what does it look like? For example, if you send out a peacekeeping force, and the majority of them are women, what kind of difference does that make to a peacekeeping force? What difference do they have in terms of an approach, and how effective are they? In Bosnia, they're asked to send out a peacekeeping force, and the majority of them are women. And I think some of the studies as to how effective they are things that we can learn from. So I think it's give and take. Yeah. I think there's things that we learn, and I think there's things that we can teach other people. So in the end, there's not a lot of differences between people. The amount of difference that we have between one another is probably about like 5%. Actually, we can learn a huge amount from one another, because in the end we're all the same. They're just in different circumstances to us. So how do they deal with their circumstances? How do we deal with ours? How do we change them?
And always believing that you can do things.
Oh yeah.
That's really, really important.
Oh yeah.
That belief that you actually can do, and it's often that confidence that women lack.
That's right.
And they sometimes don't do things because they actually do themselves down. They don't boast about what they can do. They tend to be very modest, and that can sometimes be a disadvantage, I think.
And I think the belief in forward progress, that we must always move forward, that we have a long way still to go, that things are not sorted out yet. I remember my mum used to say, I'm fighting battles so you don't have to fight them. And I feel I have battles to fight so my daughter doesn't have to fight them.
Yes. Yeah.
But how many battles will I have won and my daughter have won that my granddaughter won't have to fight? That's the thing. So I think we should ask ourselves, what battles do we not want our daughters to have to fight? And if you can identify them, then maybe your obligation is to actually go out and do your best to try and change things. And equal pay has to be one of them.
Absolutely, and also not slipping back. I think it's also important to make sure we don't slip back in any way. And sometimes I think the abuse that people have had recently, because social media is so much more easier to use, would you give any particular advice to any young women coming into politics now about some of that type of activity that they may have to put up with?
When I first got into what you might call frontline politics, and when I had the audacity to be a woman and overweight and Labour and mouthy, I got quite a lot of abuse, I'll admit it. I think there's a study which says I'm the third most abused woman on Twitter. To a certain extent, the amount of abuse that you might get is a badge of honour, because you are shaking things up, you are challenging them. Absolutely. Why does it upset them so much? Why does it upset them? It upsets them because I'm a threat, and that's good. I'm a threat to people like that. I should be.
Absolutely true. Can we just move over just for a moment to talk about Brexit?
Yeah, of course.
And just say, obviously, Llanelli is an area which is very dependent on the likes of Tata Steel and some of our car factories. Is there any particular message you would have in terms of how we should go about dealing with Brexit in this context?
I'm really worried that the way the Tories are dealing with Brexit is that it's all about the Tory party and the fights amongst the Tory party. And what they do is they're not even thinking about what's good for the country. They're just thinking about how do they keep the Tory party together. And the complete lack of leadership that we're getting from Theresa May means that it's like a free-for-all. We were speaking to Barnier yesterday, and whenever we've spoken to any of our European friends who we're supposed to be negotiating with, we continue to get the same question, which is, what does the government want? And the difficulty is that what they should be thinking about first and foremost in Any government of any stripe throughout the centuries from any country has always put the economy of their country first, has put the jobs of people first. And that's what they should be, when they're making decisions, that's what they should be measuring it against. It's like, what is good for jobs? You know, will this help in Tata Steel? Will this help in Wales? Who is going to lose their jobs if we make the wrong decision? But that's not the way they're approaching it. But we have always said that the way that we will do these negotiations, and it won't be finished, I believe it won't be finished before there's a Labour government, and we will approach this as grown-ups and as a proper government that looks after people's jobs first and foremost.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really looking forward to you coming to Llanelli on Saturday the 10th of March to celebrate International Women's Day, and I'm sure there will be a really big turnout for you.
I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really excited about it. Thank you so much for inviting me.